Hi students, first of all, please disregard my washing machine. It's in the background. Um, but I want to talk to you a little bit just about basic things to guide you through your reading. Um, it's a piece by Rowan Williams, like I explained. It's a secondary resource, not a primary text, and so it's someone who's interpreting a text for us. And to do that, you've got to know a little bit about the text. Now, I think for different reasons that it's easier for us to look at his analysis than it is for us to read Augustine right now, like for different reasons. And so let me give you kind of the tools you need to handle this. Um, the first thing to note is that there's mm, basic building blocks of talking about Augustine that I want you to come in with. And I wrote it down as two cities, three loves, two definitions. Okay, those are the building blocks. The first building block is the two cities. Augustine is famous for talking about the city of God versus the city of man. He's comparing those two things, and that's basically how he divides up all of the world. Now, there's surprising meanings in there. You're going to think he means something, or I mean, people often think he means something like Christians versus everyone else, or church versus everything else. It's not that. Uh, what it is two cities, the city of God, the city of man, that are mingled together on earth. And they're distinguished by what they love. Okay, that is how we distinguish them, not by if they call themselves a Christian or anything like that, or if they're a Christian institution. It's extremely important. Um, that brings us to our next sort of building block terms, which are the idea of three loves. And here, all he means is there's three loves um, that he thinks you can reduce human motivation to, because he thinks our love is our motivation. He says our love is our weight and it carries us. You know, kind of where the weight of your body is where your body inevitably will move. If you put weight in one direction, right, you're going to move there. Um, and there's three loves. There's the love of God, of course, and then there's what he calls the love or lust of glory, and the love or lust of domination. And those obviously aren't particularly good things to have. Partly, you'll see, because they're loves that are malformed and directed at the wrong kind of thing. Okay. And finally, the building block that you need for this article is the building blocks of the two definitions of the Commonwealth. And a Commonwealth is just another word for like a polity. The commonweal might be another phrase you've heard. One definition comes from Cicero, and in that definition, the emphasis is on a group of people gathered together in agreement, in accordance about what justice is. In the second definition, which is Augustine's definition, you have an agreement about what is loved or aimed for. This is a famous part of the City of God because it's kind of seen as a moment of Augustine taking down the previous political tradition, which is the ancient Western political tradition he's operating in, or as Williams calls it in your reading, the classical tradition with its classical account of virtue. Those building blocks in hand, let me just walk you through kind of what the text is like, so that as you listen to it or as you read it, you're following the contours that I'm going to present. The first thing that he does is he comes out of nowhere. I mean, it feels like, by talking about this person named Hannah Arendt, and she's someone I wish that I had time to teach about. She's super important, but he does a really good job of talking about her, talking about Augustine, and her critique of Augustine is super important for political philosophy generally. That's why he starts with her. That's kind of his frame. Her accusation is that Augustine can never be political. Okay, and basically, he can't be political because he's destroying what she calls the public realm. The public realm is where freedom happens. Um, Part of the reason it doesn't work on her account for Augustine is he really problematizes the motivation of glory. So when he's talking about a rent here, when Williams is, the point is to give her view, her argument that Christianity kills classical virtue, which is essentially killing public virtue, which you need for politics, right? Um, just as a quick aside, I want you to check out what the public realm is for Arendt. It's a pretty cool definition. Um, Returning to the main, argument in the text, Arendt observes that Augustine seems to have been the last to know at least what it once meant to be a citizen. The citizen is the actor on the public stage. It's the actor who has public virtue. So you run into this problem. Williams is saying, if Arendt thinks he's the one who knows what it meant to be a citizen, but she also thinks he's the killer of citizenship. You'll move through that for a bit, and then you're going to get to basically what I'd call a method that he's advocating for reading Augustine. And for thinking about Augustine, he's saying Augustine is not an institutional thinker. He's not a policy thinker. He is someone who thinks about citizenship unsystematically. And what you're looking for really is an account of virtue. A little further down, it becomes clear that the upshot of this is that politics for him is an attitude. Augustine is going to say that all people inhabit the same world with the same goods, but we have different objects of faith, hope, and love, and we have different reasons for faith, hope, and love. So keep going. He presents you with an anthropology. It's the idea Williams is saying that you should be looking at how Augustine thinks the human operates or exists in the world. And that, for him, this sharp division between the political and the spiritual is not there. You move on next to the definitions of the Commonwealth that introduces your building blocks. Here is where the payoff of knowing those definitions comes, because you're introduced first to Cicero's account of what a commonwealth is. Then you're this is kind of a cool way of thinking about text generally. I'll call this the first go round. This is William's first go round of dealing with these definitions and presenting them to you. So the next thing that happens, right, is he says, okay, here's where Augustine destroys Cicero's definition by pointing out that justice won't be possible on Cicero's own terms. The thing that he does here that's important, though, is he points out he's not owning him. Showdown, watch who wins. Okay, that's not happening. He's saying that there's something more interesting going on than just Augustine like criticizing Cicero's definition, saying why it doesn't work, and then giving a new definition. You'll see Augustine does give a corrected definition, but Williams thinks that there's more going on in this analysis um, than meets the eye. Um, he thinks that the upshot of everything that's going on here, this sort of debate about definitions of what a commonwealth even is that Augustine is really most interested in saying, you know what, classical virtue, that virtue of the public realm, the one that Arendt thinks I'm destroying. I mean, he can't say, when Arendt thinks I'm destroying because, obviously time doesn't work that way. But he says, that concept of classical virtue. Well, guess what? Once we've gone through these definitions and analyzing them, we see that that classical conception of virtue isn't actually public virtue. Okay, well, why? Here you're going to find out that the reason is because love of praise results in love of domination, or is related to love of domination. Generally speaking, and in that sense, it's not a virtue that's really couched in freedom. You'll see down here that William says Cicero recommends that the ruler of a city should be educated in the longing for glory. Thus, the rebellious impulses to tyranny, prodigality, or whatever are governed and ordered by one supreme sin, pride, in Augustine's estimation of what Cicero's doing. This means that the classical republic is shut out from ordo, order, and lex eterna, the eternal law. It's built on disorder, and that what should restrain passion is itself replaced by a passion. Okay, so more than anything, what Augustine's wanting to show is that even the Roman attempt or self-understanding of order and justice and law is not coherent, is not possible. He says they've shut themselves out from it by loving glory as much as they do. The final thing I want to point out is that there's an observation towards the end about the few and the many. And I think what Williams wants to point out here is that when we talk about public virtue in the classical world, part of what Augustine shows is that concept of virtue is inherently elitist and limited to a few people. And so when we talk about classical virtue as public freedom, well, that's difficult if you're taking seriously the idea that a commonwealth is something common, right? It's just a few who are free. And he suggests that insofar as the few are free, and they're using their freedom to pursue glory, that leads to domination of the many by the few, which leads to resentment and aggression on the part of the many. And he does some interesting stuff, Williams does, with thinking about how that impacts external politics vis-a-vis Carthage, which was kind of the ancient enemy of the Roman Republic, versus how it affects internal politics. He's just thinking alongside Augustine for those things. So that's how I'd sum up what's going on here in a way that I hope is like a guide to your reading. Thanks.